Hello Year 10. So for those of you who I have seen in school over the last few weeks, you will have done some of this in the session. So it might be you want to skip forward a bit, or it might be you just want to listen along just to remind you of your sort of task between now and September. Now, this could be something you could plough through over the next week and a half and get done. It could be something you're going to chip away at sort of over the summer holidays. I wouldn't normally agree with setting you work over the summer because you would have been in school, but I also know just through seeing probably about half of you in school, the amount of work people have been able to do for various reasons has been massively varied. So if you are someone who has flat out done everything, you know, since lockdown, then you might think, do you know what, I'll try and see what I can do till the end of term, but I'm not really prepared to work over my summer holiday. I need to give myself that break. And I would say you are more than entitled to that. But if you're someone who, for whatever reason, has dropped off this term or struggled for your own personal reasons to engage with the work, then I would urge you through this video to start thinking about how you can put yourself in the strongest position for when you are back in September. And you will be back. We will be back in the classroom. We will have to really focus on getting you prepared for this GCSE. And there is no reason, with all of the video lessons me and Miss Street have done between us, there is no reason why this lockdown had to negatively affect you. Okay, so those videos are there for you to choose to engage with, and if you haven't engaged with them already, I would urge you please to do so from this point onwards. So we are going to focus on the poetry anthology. However, I would urge you to reread the literature texts, or at least watch a decent version of it. Remind yourself of A Christmas Carol, remind yourself of An In Spectacles, remind yourself of Romeo and Juliet, because the better you know those books, the better you will do in the exam. And the only way you're going to know them well is through rereading them. So, you know, lie out in the sunshine with a nice cold drink and your copy of A Christmas Carol and just get it read, sit on the beach and just read it would be something that I would highly recommend you do as well. But we're going to focus on the poetry because, as I've said in the sessions, the poetry is, in my opinion, the most difficult bit of the exam. So if you followed all of my videos, by this point you will have annotated all 18 poems. Now, some of that would have been done during school time before lockdown, but what I have done is through these YouTube videos, I have annotated for you the rest of the poems. And those videos, you know, they'll be there indefinitely. You can choose to access them anytime you want. You could be asked to write about any one of those 18 poems in the exam. The good news, though, is that you get a copy, a blank copy of it. But they could ask you to write about a theme. How is a theme presented in any of those poems? Then for the second question, you will be asked to pick a poem of your choice from that anthology and pick one with the same theme as the poem you've just written about and compare how the theme is presented. However, you've got to do that from memory. You will not have a copy of that poem in front of you, and that is why you must know these poems pretty well, and that's why they are going to be the focus of your revision, and that's what this lesson is about. So if you're asked to write about a theme, then it would make sense to start off by thinking about what are the themes. Now, there are 5 central or main themes that all of these 18 poems fit into: love and relationships, war and conflict, place, nature, and power. Now, some poems only comfortably fit into one of these themes, but some poems fit into more than one of these themes. So take a poem like Valentine, the Onion poem, for example. That very obviously fits into love and relationships. You could tentatively link it to power, maybe, because it's about the power dynamics of their relationship, but that you'd struggle to write about power in Valentine by itself. That is predominantly a love and relationships poem. But then take a poem like The Manhunt, the one about Eddie and Laura, Eddie who had the bullet ricocheting in his body, and the poem's about Laura, his wife, getting to know him. That is, again, a love and relationships poem. It's about rebuilding their relationship, but it's equally a war poem because he was injured in war. So that The Manhunt would be in both of those categories. Place, so you have poems like London and Living Space. There's sort of a narrower group of poems that are about a particular place. Nature, obviously all of the romantic poems and the neo-romantic poems such as Hawk Roosting and Death of a Naturalist. And then power, you know, again, mainly you've got Ozymandias and Hawk Roosting as your power poems, but both of those poems would fit into some of the others as well. So these are your main themes. However, last year, the exam board threw us for a bit of a loop because we expected it would be one of these themes that you would be asked to write about. However, they didn't. They were asked to write about the theme of loss in A Wife in London. We weren't expecting it to be worded that way. So what we've done this year is we've widened those themes. So think of these as your secondary themes, if you like. They can all fit into one of these, but we've also got to think about how these themes link into them as well. So themes such as faith and worship, the passage of time, change and transformation, pain and suffering, death and loss, and negative emotions. We've got to make sure we're prepared to write about these broader and wider themes. So what I would do, particularly if you didn't attend one of the in-school sessions or you don't have the work that you completed with you in those sessions at home, I would pause the video, write out the main themes, and then pause it and write out these secondary themes before moving on. So what I'm going to show you today and then set you to do before September is to fill in these revision sheets where we are clustering these poems in their theme groups. And these resources will be fantastic to help you revise this poetry as we lead up to the exam. And you will see that all of these pages are attached to the email or class charts that you would have got from your teacher. So this is the one we focused on in school. We looked at war and conflict because they were poems that I think most of the classes had done. So in the war and conflict cluster, we have The Soldier by Rupert Brooke, Dulce et Decorum Est, the one about the gas attack, The Manhunt, as I mentioned earlier, with Eddie and Laura, Mamet's Wood, about the little bits of bone and the unmarked mass grave that had been uncovered, and then A Wife in London, the one about the poor wife sitting in the foggy streets of London who receives news her husband has died, and then the next day receives a letter which he wrote before he died. So these are all war poems. What this grid gets you to do is take each poem one at a time and pick 4 quotations, short quotations, and simply write those quotations on the grid. So I'd look at The Soldier, I'd pick a quotation from near the start, write it out. So for example, Forever England. I then would go a little bit further down. So I might think, oh, okay, England bore, and I was going to look at the personification of England as a mother. a little bit further down, I might do all evil shed away, the idea of war baptizing you and washing away your sins. Then I might choose to end with English heaven. You know, don't be afraid, because even if you die, you will still return to England, because England is so perfect, it must be what heaven is like. So what I've got there essentially is, if the soldier came up in the exam, I've already identified the 4 quotes I would want to choose to write about in that 20 minutes. And we've got 4 quotations, because generally in 20 minutes, that's the amount of quotations, the amount of coverage you should be aiming for. Now, some of you will be able to go beyond that. Some of you still, you know, might be struggling to get to 3. But this is what we will build on as we start practicing this skill again in class. So finally, then you have a box for other themes. And that is when I would go to either my main themes. So a poem like The Soldier, you could say, is also a love and relationships poem, because it's a sonnet, it's a love poem to his country. Equally, you might look at this and say, well, you've got the faith and worship, because you've got the Christian aspects of baptism and a pulse in the eternal mind, being like God. It's change and transformation and death and loss, essentially, because, you know, you are thinking about transforming that piece of land into a patch of England. And obviously he's confronting this idea of dying in battle. So you would then think about the other themes. You do the same thing for Dolce et Decorum Est, then the Manhunt, then the Metswood, and then A Wife in London. And what you then have on one piece of A4 poetry is a fantastic resource to help you revise these poems as individuals. So if that poem comes up in the exam, this is what I want to write about. But what it also gives you is an opportunity to look at how those quotations are similar and different. So you look at the quotations you'd pick for The Soldier, and then you'd look at the quotations you'd pick for Dolce et Decorum Est. There would be lots and lots of differences in the way war is presented through the language there, because we know, due to the context, that Rupert Brooke and Wilfred Owen had massively different experiences of World War I. So these sheets will become a really powerful revision resource. And if it was me doing my GCSEs, knowing that people tend to learn a lot simply by having things in their line of sight, I would stick these on my bedroom wall, or I would rotate and have them on my fridge when I had breakfast in the morning leading up to my exam. If you're lucky enough to have a space you can work at home, you know, a desk, I might tape them or rotate them above that, because you would be surprised how much lodges in your long-term memory simply just by looking at something, you know, day in, day out. Or even if you're just going to have them in a booklet and then systematically sort of read through and revise them. Now, what I'm saying is, I would like you at the very least to make sure you have all 5 of the war poems completed. By that I mean you've watched my videos, or you've watched Miss Street's videos if you're in her class, because she's been doing her own, as you know. You've watched those videos, you've made some notes, whether that's on a copy of the poem that you've printed out or your anthology, or whether you've made notes on a separate piece of paper, that you've at least watched those videos, and then you fill in this one sheet. Okay, and you'll see that there are more sheets, and I'm going to go through them in a minute. But the bare minimum I would like you to do is have got to that point, have done all 5 of these war poems, have made those notes, and have filled in this sheet. Okay, and this is what has been set as your lockdown work over this term. Those of you that have been in school, we've gone over some of those poems in school as well. So this shouldn't be, even if you've done none of them, this shouldn't be a sudden large workload. And I'll remind you at the end of the video how to find all of my other YouTube videos as well. So what you will notice though is in your pack you haven't just got a grid for war and conflict. What we have is one for the other poems as well. So here, for example, is one on the theme of power. Now you'll notice here we've only got Hawk Roosting and Ozymandias, because they are the real poems that are about power. But we will know that there are lots and lots of other themes linked into these 2 poems. So again, you'd go back to your notes, if you've done these poems. Now, like I said, on my YouTube channel, there are videos annotating all of these poems. So if you have done the war poems and you then want to push beyond, even if you're not in my own class, do please feel free to do those poems independently or to look at those videos and fill in some of these other sheets as well. If you are someone who has done all of the videos, which I know some of you have, then you might want to start filling in some of these other sheets as well. So you might choose to fill in the one on power. We then have the passing of time. So afternoons, as imperceptibly as grief, To Autumn and Death of a Naturalist are all poems about the passing of time. Afternoons, as imperceptibly as grief and To Autumn, and Death of a Naturalist. Now, Afternoons and as imperceptibly as grief, I have YouTube videos of. To Autumn and Death of a Naturalist we did when we were in school. So it might be that you have to just, I don't know, Google the poem just to remind yourself of it maybe if you don't have your anthology. Again, place, London and living space. We all did those poems at the start of the year. Nature. Now you can see there are lots of these poems that focus on nature. I was a bit unsure whether to put London in there because London is by William Blake, who was one of the first romantic poets, but whilst he's contrasting the horror of sort of the industrial revolutionized London, and it should be, you know, this natural beautiful thing, there's actually very little direct nature imagery in that poem. So London you might find a little bit tricky, but certainly all of these other poems all have aspects of nature in there, and you can see all of the romantic poems as well in there. You know, She Walks in Beauty, Ozymandias, To Autumn, the Prelude. Then we have love and relationships. Now, many of these we did in school while we were doing Romeo and Juliet. And you can see there poems like The Manhunt and A Wife in London, also part of the war cluster. Then, of course, Afternoons, which I've done a YouTube video of during lockdown as well. And then we're not going to worry about that because that's just Context of the Soldier. So you will have these and then some other grids all attached to class charts for the Office sort of 365 email group that your teachers have been using to keep in contact with you. Do please try and get at least those war poems done. You know, we really need to make sure that in September we are ready to go, and despite the difficulties that you may have faced during lockdown, for whatever reason getting work done, it is not too late now to just get a little bit under your belt before September, and you will feel more confident and you will feel more prepared if you know you've done a little bit of that work. As always, please do email me directly or your class teacher if you have any questions, if you need any additional support, because we are here to help and to support you. Equally, although you may not watch this video before then, I will be doing a live learning clinic Monday morning, and then the week afterwards as well. So if you, particularly if you were not able to attend any of the in-school sessions, you want that opportunity to just ask me any questions live, or to ask me to go through any of the poems with you directly, you know, that's what those learning clinics, those sessions are for. Okay, so hopefully I may see one or two of you there. Take care and well done for the work that you have been doing.